Well, good morning, beautiful people. I hope you're doing all right for what day is it? Wednesday? I think so. Hope life is going well. Just a little quick one. Been going through some of the news this morning. It's been announced, unsurprisingly, in my view, that TNT Radio is going under. Their investors have pulled their funds, at least two of them, one of whom was I suspect, extremely wealthy Queensland businessman. And a German was involved as well, according to certain reports. They've pulled their funding for it. An organisation that I had the pleasure of working for very briefly, at which point I understood, having seen how the management worked, that it was never going to work. Not in any true radio sense. And part of the problem that TNT Radio faced is, well, maybe I'll wait until they're off the air before I tell you why it failed. But it failed for some very simple reasons. The people who are in charge of it are two of those reasons, two very big reasons. But there are others. It's a pity because TNT Radio had the opportunity, should they have been able to get their egos out of the way, to actually play a considerable role in the future of broadcasting in this country. They're going under, so they say, because they can't get anybody to buy advertising on the channel. They don't want to be associated, advertisers don't want to be associated with the conspiracy theories. Now, TNT have been working back their conspiracy theory list of presenters ever since I was working there a couple of years ago. Now, bear in mind, I didn't work there long because I dragged out a conspiracy. I'm not going to call it a theory because I have photos of it, of the beam that burnt everybody in Canberra. Now, I made a comment about that, talked about it with Sean Ambrose on the air, and apparently that, along with a couple of other things that I mentioned that night, namely who was funding certain things. Malcolm Turnbull's name was mentioned in that program, a few other things. Anyway, the next day they fired me because I had put up a conspiracy theory. Now, that's the same management that fired me who told me, go hard, Carl, be as outrageous and out there as you can. But what the problem was is that TNT Radio and their management wished to control their Australian presenters. They wished to control who they spoke to. They directed them. They put little producers. And the woman behind all this, a woman named Jennifer Squires, who I don't think has ever had a creative thought of her own, and has an ABC journalism background, which is, well, you know where we're going with that. Absolute tyrant of a woman to try and work with. And drove, I don't know how many people out of the building. The problem is, if you're going to treat people with that amount of disrespect, you have to be a legend. You have to be a star. You have to know your shit. And there wasn't one person inside TNT Radio that knew their radio shit. Not one. Unfortunately, they've employed many of my friends since, working behind the scenes, ex-radio people who, for one reason or another, lost their jobs in this trimming down in the current mainstream radio market. They get suckered into these kinds of little operations, thinking that they're being run by professionals. And TNT Radio was never professional. Part of the reason they hated me was because I would find my own interview subjects, my own topics, and my own people to talk to. I never went to their book. But their book, funnily enough, had access to every politician, every influencer trying to push political rhetoric or push a political point into the parliament, trying to manipulate politicians. And yes, I guess it was a sort of a low-end ABC kind of access. ABC has access to everything. TNT Radio had access to a strong group of leaning to the right, I wouldn't say right-wing, but leaning to the right politicians who would come on and talk to Mike or whoever. Now, the other part of the problem with TNT Radio's programming, being an Australian radio station, is that they were only programmed out of here for about when I was there, I think it was 4 to 5 hours a day. The rest of the content came from some very radical people outside of Australia, the UK and America. And some of it was very good, some of it's absolute crap. And that's indicative of the management style and who they would employ. When they actually employed professionals like me, and I introduced other professionals, they didn't. It didn't work because the professionals know how things are meant to be done. And when you're dealing with a couple of numpties who are running TNT Radio, Mike Ryan and Jennifer Squires, I got nothing particularly against Mike. He's just a very weak man. He's just weak. Didn't have the balls to ring me and sack me himself. It was just a really weak effort. And then all of a sudden they started trying to steal. Well, I'll tell you one of the rules they put on me just before they sacked me. I had to provide all the details to the people I was interviewing, the people I was finding to interview. Now, at that time, the first time I got to speak to Ricardo Bosi was on TNT Radio. TNT didn't have any contacts for Bosi, or none that he was going to reply to. So they were desperate to try and get my contacts into Bosi, to try and get that. They were about stealing my contacts and then being able to farm those off around the network. And I don't mind sharing contacts at all. That's not a problem. But my contacts were not coming out of the same book that the contacts they were willing to share were coming out of. And I felt TNT Radio was very definitely being steered in a certain direction by its management. I'm not going to say its ownership because I really don't know who the owners were. I was paid by a secret system. You would get a receipt to say you'd been paid, but it came from a remailing email address out of America and all sorts of different things. You couldn't actually track who was paying you. So that made me interested to learn more about them as well, because clearly they were funded to the tune of, and this was when I was there, which is a few years ago now, they were funded to the tune of about $35,000 a week then. That's what it took to keep that business on the air, with all the infrastructure, the production equipment, the gear that you need to stream, the backup stream that they had organised. They had two backup streams, in fact, one through Chicago from memory and one through London. So if the Australian stream went down, it would pick up from different parts of the world. It was a very well put together system from the perspective of how it worked or hung together around the world. However, run by a couple of numpties who employed radio professionals and just treated them horrendously. I counselled every one of my friends not to take a job with them because of how they work and what you can expect and how you can expect to be treated by them. Every one of my friends who did wind up with a job there, except one maybe who might still be there until they close business Friday, wound up out of their business. So I can't say I'm disappointed. TNT Radio for me has always been something else. It wasn't, they say it's all about free speech, but it's not. They shut down my free speech in a heartbeat without any reason. Why? Because I drew attention to something they didn't want drawn attention to. Too many secrets at TNT Radio, and too many thieves trying to steal contacts from people. And I was getting phone calls from friends of mine that I'd interviewed, people that I'd interviewed while I was at TNT, because TNT were ringing them saying, oh, would you come back on and talk with us? Would you come back on and talk with us? They didn't need me. They didn't need my contacts, but all of a sudden they did. It's very strange. It's very strange. But I've got to say, waking up this morning and seeing that little bit of news, while not surprising, does give my day a little lift, because we now have a very large pretender in the market out of it. You want to talk about controlled information? TNT Radio was controlled 100%. And the reason I didn't fit in is because I refused to be controlled. I lasted 3 weeks or 4 weeks. Wasn't long. However, I knew after working for 3 days with Jennifer Squires, it wasn't going to work out. So I'm not at all disappointed to hear this go. Wow, I'm up early. No, Bradford, I'm always up with the kookaburras, but lovely to have you around, mate. I guess you're up making breakfast below you. That'd be good. Anyway, TNT Radio, gone. And as of Friday. I just wonder whether or not that wealthy Queensland businessman is still serious about supporting true Australian content. True Australian content. For more than 3 hours a day. He was funding, well, they were funding 21 hours of international programming a day, days a week, and maybe 3 or 4 of actual Australian programming. We could do better, but we need a little bit of funding. Nowhere near the level that was given to TNT Radio. The difference being, we're a group of radio professionals and TV professionals. We understand that sometimes the subject matter that we discuss is not wholesome enough for an advertiser to be part of. That's why we struggle with FBN to get advertisers. And we've got to do this on something, don't we? It has to be funded some way. So we do the best that we can. I see that John Wilson is also, although he's not taking donations, he's changed the wording, and probably wisely, to a gift. But I do like the way he's saying he's not asking for donations. That would be a $200 donation he's asking for your joining his little freedom movement. I guess he's still looking for 1,000 of you to join that at $200 each. What he plans to do with it, I don't know. But I suspect. So, I don't know, if there is truly a Queensland, or a wealthy Queensland businessman that's interested in funding real Australian content, then please reach out, carl@vofhq.com. We're not going to be controlled, but what we will do is promote Australia, Australian products, Australian businesses to our audience and the wider one. Yep, small steps to begin with. Nobody's going to make $1 million out of advertising with us, certainly not us. It's not about making money. It's about being able to stay on the air long enough to give communication to you. When we find things out, whether it be me, whether it be Guru, whether it be whoever, it's increasingly going to be made much, much, much more difficult for us to get our message to you because of the way the government is acting, particularly in Queensland, and don't think that's not going to get rolled out all over the country. It will. So, if you happen to know who the wealthy Queensland businessman is, or the wealthy German businessman, or any of the other investors in TNT who must be, by now, a bit gun-shy because they've been lied to by supposed radio professionals, I suspect, and they have been disappointed at every turn. However, they have always put their hand in their pocket for a very considerable sum of money every week, and it's fallen over. Mike Ryan makes the excuse that, oh, well, nobody in Australia wants free speech. I would argue that even a little pissant like me, and the audience that I can gather, argues against that fact. Free speech is desperately wanted and required in this country. To stifle it is to lay down one of the greatest arms we have in this fight. Maybe the only arm we have left in this fight. So, I'm not disappointed that TNT Radio has gone. I'm surprised it's taken this long, because the mismanagement, the egos running rampant at the top of that business was staggering. Staggering. I have only seen egos like that in the television world previously, because people in the television world without much experience at all do tend to get very large egos very quickly. Well, these two had nothing on TV star egos. These two just thought. Anyway, pretty wild to see that it's finally gone under, and the businessman has realised that you can't keep funneling tens of thousands of dollars per week into ventures like that and expect with a 95, 97% international programming feature to attract an Australian audience. It's never going to happen. So I did tell you we'd see the end of TNT Radio. When I started all this, I did say I would see them to the end. Now, can't say I've got anything to do with it, but it's easy to see the fakers from those who are the doers. And TNT Radio have been nothing but fake from the day they took to the air. Good riddance to them. I'm sorry for the people employed by them that they're now going to be looking for more work. However, we haven't lost anything of value with TNT Radio going off the air. It just adds two more dickheads to the road.